All right, everyone, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into the wild world of Texas real estate.
You know, folks always say everything's bigger in Texas, and that definitely includes the real estate market.
We've got our trusty guides right here. The Key Point Review from the Texas Real Estate Commission and Modern Real Estate Practice in Texas. Think of it as our treasure map and compass for navigating this exciting terrain.
Love that analogy. And just like any good treasure hunt, we need to understand the lay of the land, right?
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What makes Texas real estate? Well, Texas real estate.
It's not just about the physical land itself, but the bundle of rights that come with it. The Key Point Review lays it out really well.
Rights, like more than just putting up a fence and calling it yours.
Way more. Think of it like owning a multi-layered cake.
Okay, now you're making me hungry. I'm picturing a big old Texas sheet cake.
Even better. So you might have the rights to the surface, someone else could own the mineral rights below, and get this, someone else could even own the air rights above.
Hold up. Air rights? Like owning the sky? Is that even a thing?
You bet it is, especially in booming cities like Dallas and Austin. It's those air rights that allow for those towering skyscrapers. Imagine trying to build up without owning the right to the space above.
Mind blown. Okay, that's definitely something I never considered.
It's a whole other dimension of ownership, right? And here's where the Key Point Review throws us another curveball: surveys. It emphasizes how crucial they are, especially when buying property.
All right, so more than just knowing where your property lines are.
Exactly. Imagine buying a place with a charming old barn, thinking you've scored a fixer-upper project, only to find out through a survey that it actually partially belongs to your neighbor.
Oof, talk about awkward backyard BBQs.
Right. That's why the Key Point Review specifically mentions improvement surveys. It's about knowing exactly what's on your land and what's not, because those improvements, those structures, are key to understanding a property's true value and how you can use it.
So it's like a safety net, making sure what you see is what you get.
Exactly. And speaking of avoiding those real estate surprises, let's talk contracts, because, as they say, it's all fun and games until someone ends up in court.
Ooh, getting serious. So the Key Point Review digs into contract enforceability in Texas. What's the deal there?
Well, in Texas, you can't just shake hands on a cattle ranch deal and call it a day.
No more good old-fashioned handshake agreements.
Well, they're good for a handshake, but not for the courtroom. Contracts are crucial for making those real estate promises stick, especially in the eyes of the law.
So what makes a contract enforceable in Texas?
The Key Point Review breaks it down into 5 key ingredients. You could have competent parties involved, a clear offer and acceptance, something of value being exchanged. That's the legal consideration. The agreement has to be for something legal, no funny business. And most importantly, it's got to be in writing and signed by all parties.
So everything in black and white, signed on the dotted line.
You got it. No more napkin contracts in Texas. This protects both buyers and sellers and keeps things clear. But, of course, navigating this world of contracts and legalities requires a good map, which brings us to the big kahuna, the Texas Real Estate Commission, or TRC for short.
Right. And our other guide, Modern Real Estate Practice in Texas, paints TRC as a major player in the Lone Star State's real estate game.
They're like the sheriff, making sure everyone plays fair and square. They set the rules of the game, from who can be a real estate agent to what those agents can and can't do, all to protect consumers and keep the market running smoothly.
So they're kind of like the referees blowing the whistle on any shady dealings.
You got it. And speaking of running smoothly, modern real estate practice dives into the law of supply and demand in real estate, which can get pretty wild in Texas.
Oh, tell me about it. I saw a bidding war over the last gallon of Bluebell ice cream at the grocery store the other day, and it reminded me of the housing market here.
Limited supply plus high demand, and things go crazy, whether it's ice cream or houses.
It's like those economics classes are coming back to haunt me. But before we get lost in the weeds of supply and demand curves, there's something else that caught my eye, those homeowner benefits that Texas is always bragging about.
Modern real estate practice definitely highlights those, and they can be pretty sweet.
Spill the beans. What are we talking about?
Well, for starters, there are some enticing tax breaks, like the capital gains exclusion.
Capital gains. That sounds complicated.
It's simpler than you think. Let's say you sell your house for a profit, which hopefully you do. Well, in Texas, you might not have to pay any taxes on up to a whopping $500,000 of that profit if you're married, or $250,000 if you're single.
Whoa, that's a whole lot of cash you get to keep. No wonder people are moving to Texas in droves.
Yeah.
But it's more than just that one-time tax break, right? What else do homeowners in Texas get to enjoy?
Well, think about this. Every year, when tax season rolls around, you can often deduct those hefty mortgage interest payments and your dreaded property taxes from your federal income taxes.
Now that's music to my ears. Every little bit helps, right? But before we all run out and buy houses tomorrow, we've got to talk about those potential pitfalls because buying a house is a big decision and no one wants any nasty surprises.
You're absolutely right. And that's where property disclosures come into play. Think of them as those warning labels you see on everything these days.
Speaking of warnings, this modern real estate practice book mentions something called a seller's disclosure notice. Sounds a little intimidating.
Not intimidating, more like illuminating. Think of it as a flashlight shining on any issues with the property that the seller knows about, from a leaky faucet to foundation problems. It's all about transparency and protecting everyone involved.
So the seller can't just sweep those pesky problems under the rug and pretend they don't exist.
Nope, not in Texas. They've got to come clean about any known issues, and it's all laid out in the Texas Property Code.
Okay, that's reassuring for buyers like me. It's good to know there are systems in place to help protect you from those real estate nightmares. So the seller can't just sweep those pesky problems under the rug and pretend they don't exist.
Nope, not if they want to stay on the right side of the law. The Texas Property Code has a long list of things sellers have to fess up about.
Like what? Give me the dirt.
Well, we're talking about the big stuff, of course, things that could really impact a buyer's decision. Structural problems, like cracks in the foundation. You know, those cracks that make you go, that's not good. Plumbing nightmares, roof leaks that could turn your living room into a swimming pool, even whether the property's got a history of flooding.
So no hiding the fact that your property is basically waterfront property during hurricane season.
Not a chance. Transparency is key in Texas real estate. Buyers need to know what they're getting into, and the seller's disclosure notice is designed to do just that.
It's like a truth serum for houses. Speaking of truth, let's talk numbers because at the end of the day, real estate is also about the bottom line. And our sources here dive into some essential math concepts that every Texan should know.
Absolutely. Whether you're deciphering property taxes, calculating those square feet for your dream backyard, or even figuring out a real estate agent's commission, a little math goes a long way.
All right, pop quiz time. Let's say you're selling your place for, say, $300,000, and the going rate for a real estate agent's commission is the standard 6%. How much of that sweet, sweet cash do they get?
That's an easy one. You just multiply the sales price by the commission rate. So $300,000 times 0.06, that's 6% as a decimal. For those who forgot their high school math, and you get a cool $18,000 going to the agent.
All right, that makes sense. But then there's the dreaded property tax, which we all know can be a real doozy in Texas. How do they even calculate that beast?
Well, it all starts with your property's assessed value, which basically means what the local appraisal district thinks your property is worth. They look at things like location, size, condition, and even what similar properties in the area have recently sold for.
So those nosy neighbors who always want to know how much your house is worth, turns out they might actually be helping the appraisal district.
You got it. And once they've figured out that magical number, your assessed value, they multiply it by the tax rate, which is set by those lovely folks over at your local taxing authorities.
And just like that, poof, there goes a chunk of your hard-earned cash to fund schools, roads, and whatever else those local authorities dream up.
Well, it's all part of being a homeowner, right?
It's like a real-life game of Monopoly, except we're talking about your dream ranch instead of boardwalk. Speaking of dream ranches, imagine you found the perfect piece of Texas land, and now you're trying to figure out how many longhorns you can fit on it. That's where those area calculations come in handy, right?
Exactly. And for a simple rectangular property, it's as easy as multiplying the length by the width. So if your ranch is, say, 1,000 feet long and 500 feet wide, you're looking at a whopping 500,000 square feet of prime Texas real estate.
Now that's a lot of space for some cattle to roam. But before we get too lost in our Texas-sized dreams, let's bring it back down to earth and talk about the not-so-fun but oh-so-crucial topic of appraisals.
Ah, yes. Appraisals, those necessary but sometimes nerve-wracking assessments that determine a property's market value.
Right. Because, let's face it, we all think our houses are worth $1 million. But those appraisers, they're the ones who bring us back to reality.
They're the voice of reason in a sometimes emotionally charged real estate market. And their job is to be objective, using data and analysis to determine a property's worth.
The modern real estate practice book digs deeper into how appraisers work their magic And it's definitely not as simple as throwing a dart at a board with random numbers on it.
Not at all. They've got these different methods like the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach, each suited for different types of properties and situations.
Okay, those sound a bit intimidating. Can you walk us through each one?
Sure, the sales comparison approach is like playing real estate matchmaker. Appraisers find properties similar to yours that have recently sold in the area and then compare their features, condition, and of course sale prices to determine what your property should be worth.
So it's all about finding those real estate doppelgangers.
You got it. Now, let's say you've got a one-of-a-kind property, maybe a custom-built home that's like nothing else on the market. That's where the cost approach comes in.
Because good luck finding a twin for your architectural masterpiece.
Exactly. With the cost approach, the appraiser figures out how much it would cost to build an exact replica of your property today, factoring in depreciation, of course, because even new construction loses some value over time.
Fascinating. So each approach serves a unique purpose. Now, what about the income approach? When does that come into play?
The income approach is the go-to method for those properties that are all about bringing in the dough-think rental properties or commercial buildings. It analyzes the property's income potential, factoring in rental rates, vacancy rates, those pesky operating expenses, and overall market trends to determine what it's worth as a money-making machine.
It's like valuing a business based on its cash flow.
Oh,
So much more to it than just looking at a house and picking a random number.
absolutely. And once you've got that value in hand, you need to navigate the sometimes murky waters of financing, which is a whole other beast. Lucky for us, the Modern Real Estate Practice in Texas book breaks down different loan types, like those conventional loans, FHA loans for our first-time homebuyers out there, and VA loans for those who've served our country.
It's like a crash course in mortgages. But when I bought my first place, I was so overwhelmed by all the options. Can you give us a quick rundown of these loan types?
You bet. Conventional loans are like your everyday run-of-the-mill mortgages, not backed by the government, so they typically have stricter requirements. FHA loans, on the other hand, are insured by the Federal Housing Administration, which means they're designed to help make homeownership more accessible, often with lower down payment requirements and a bit more lenient credit score requirements.
So a good option for first-time buyers or those who might not have perfect credit.
Exactly. Now, VA loans are specifically for those who have bravely served our country, eligible veterans, active duty military personnel, and even surviving spouses. These loans are guaranteed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, offering incredibly competitive interest rates and often requiring zero down payment.
Now, that's a well-deserved benefit. Okay,
Yeah.
so those are the main players in the mortgage world. But there's more to it than just picking a loan type,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. There are all sorts of terms and conditions, fees, and fine print that come with each loan type. It's important to read everything carefully, compare offers from different lenders, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right, because no one wants to be surprised by hidden fees or confusing terms buried in the fine print. It's like those dreaded airline baggage fees. No one likes those. But we'll save our rant about hidden fees for another day. For now, let's shift our focus to the grand finale of the real estate journey, closing the deal.
Yes. Closing that glorious moment when all your hard work and negotiations finally pay off and you get to hold that shiny new deed in your hands.
Or hand over the keys and say goodbye to that old money pit, depending on which side of the transaction you're on. But either way, modern real estate practice in Texas makes it clear that closing is not a solo mission. It takes a village, right?
It does. Think of it like a carefully orchestrated dance with a whole cast of characters, each playing a vital role. You've got the buyer and the seller, of course, the lender, if there's a mortgage involved, the title company, making sure the property's title is squeaky clean, and the closing agent, who's like the stage manager, ensuring everything runs smoothly and according to plan.
So what does this closing ceremony actually look like? Do we all gather around a conference table, sign a mountain of paperwork, and then pop champagne?
Well, there's usually less champagne and a lot more paperwork than you might imagine. But essentially, yes, you'll review and sign all those important documents, including the deed, the mortgage note, and a whole stack of other legal forms. And of course, there's the exchange of funds, with the buyer bringing their down payment and closing costs to the table.
Sounds like a recipe for writer's cramp. But hey, at least at the end of it, you've either got the keys to your dream home or a hefty check in your pocket. Speaking of checks, the book mentions a closing statement. What's the deal with that?
The closing statement. It's like the financial breakdown of the entire real estate saga. It lists every single penny involved in the transaction, the purchase price, those dreaded closing costs, loan fees, prorated property taxes. Even prepaid insurance premiums, you name it, it's on there.
So it's basically a detailed accounting of who pays what, ensuring everyone's on the same page.
You got it. And both the buyer and the seller get a copy, usually a few days before the actual closing, so they can review it with a fine-tooth comb and ask any questions. It's essential to read this document carefully and make sure everything aligns with the terms of the contract and your expectations.
Don't want to sign on the dotted line without knowing exactly where your money's going.
Absolutely. Transparency is key. And speaking of transparency, let's shift gears and shine a light on a crucial aspect of real estate transactions that often gets overlooked: agency.
Agency. Now, are we talking about those secret agents like James Bond? But instead of cool gadgets, they've got blueprints and for sale signs.
Not quite, although that would make the real estate world a whole lot more exciting. In the world of Texas real estate, agency refers to that legal relationship between real estate professionals, like those agents and brokers, and the people they represent, the buyers or sellers.
So it's all about who's on whose team.
Exactly. And these relationships are important because they dictate who the agent is legally obligated to protect and represent throughout the entire real estate odyssey.
So no double agents playing both sides.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. The Modern Real Estate Practice book makes it clear that Texas law takes agency relationships very seriously.
So no playing both sides of the fence without everyone knowing about it.
You got it. Transparency is paramount. Buyers and sellers need to know exactly who's representing whom to avoid any conflicts of interest.
Makes sense. It's like in those courtroom dramas, the lawyers always have to disclose if they've got a conflict of interest. So walk us through the different agency relationships, because I'm sensing it's a bit more complicated than just buyer's agent and seller's agent.
You're right. We've got those two, of course. Seller agency is when the agent is team seller, working in their best interest. Buyer agency is the opposite. The agent is all about the buyer, guiding them through the process and looking out for their needs. But then there's this thing called dual agency, where an agent can actually represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction.
Hold on. Representing both sides. Isn't that a conflict of interest waiting to happen?
It can be, which is why it's highly regulated in Texas and requires informed consent from both the buyer and seller. The broker involved has to walk a tightrope, remaining completely neutral and often appointing separate agents within their brokerage to represent each party individually.
So it's like having a neutral mediator, making sure both sides play fair.
Exactly. Now, regardless of who they represent, all agents in Texas are bound by a strict code of conduct. The book calls them fiduciary duties, and they're basically like the 10 commandments of real estate.
Lay it on me. What are these sacred real estate commandments?
Well, first and foremost, there's loyalty. The agent has to put their client's best interests above all else, even their own desire to close a deal quickly. Then there's confidentiality. What's said between an agent and their client is top secret, like those confidential files in a spy movie.
So no gossiping about your client's lowball offer at the water cooler.
Exactly. And then there's obedience. The agent has to follow their client's lawful instructions, even if they don't necessarily agree with them. Of course, there's disclosure, which means the agent has to reveal any material facts that could impact the transaction, even if it means potentially losing the deal. And finally, there's accounting, which basically boils down to handling their client's money with the utmost care and transparency.
Wow, it's like being a real estate therapist, confidant, and financial advisor all rolled into one. No wonder they get paid the big bucks.
Well, those commissions are earned, that's for sure. Now, speaking of protecting the client, modern real estate practice also mentions this thing called the Information About Brokerage Services Notice, or IABS for short.
IABS. Sounds more like something you'd hear at a doctor's office.
Maybe, but in the real estate world, this IABS notice is like a consumer's guide to understanding how agency works. Agents are required to give it to potential clients early on, explaining those different agency relationships and outlining their duties and responsibilities.
So it's all about empowering consumers to make informed decisions about who they want on their team.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? And speaking of powerful forces in real estate, let's talk about those all-important fair housing laws.
Because everyone deserves a fair shot at the American dream of homeownership, right?
Absolutely. And thankfully, we've got laws in place to help make that dream a reality. The Modern Real Estate Practice book delves into the Fair Housing Act, a landmark piece of legislation that's been around for decades, ensuring equal housing opportunities for everyone.
So no more discriminating against someone because of their race, religion, national origin, or any of those other protected classes.
You got it. The Fair Housing Act says everyone deserves a fair shake. regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what they believe in. It covers everything from renting an apartment to securing a mortgage, making sure that everyone has a chance to live wherever they can afford.
That's how it should be. But laws are only as good as the people who enforce them,
Yeah.
right? So who's making sure everyone plays by the fair housing rules?
Well, that's where the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD for short, comes in. They're like the fair housing watchdogs, investigating complaints, mediating disputes, and taking action against those who violate the law.
It's good to know there's someone looking out for those who might be discriminated against in the housing market. Now let's switch gears for a moment and talk about something that's essential for protecting your biggest investment, your home. I'm talking about homeowners insurance.
Ah, yes. Because even in the Lone Star State, things happen, hailstorms, tornadoes, even those pesky house fires, you gotta be prepared.
Right. And the Modern Real Estate Practice book dives into the wonderful world of homeowners insurance, but it can be a bit overwhelming. There are all these different policy types like HOA, HOB, and HOC. It's enough to make your head spin. Can you break it down for us?
Absolutely. Think of it like ordering off a menu. HOA is like the basic insurance burger. It covers those common perils like fire, lightning, windstorms, maybe a little vandalism thrown in for good measure. It's usually the most affordable option, but it's also got the most limited coverage.
So good for those on a budget, but maybe not the best option if you live in a disaster-prone area.
Exactly. Now, HOB, sometimes called all-risk coverage, is like stepping it up to the deluxe burger. It's got all the coverage of HOA plus some extra toppings like protection against damage from falling objects, water damage from plumbing leaks, and even those accidental mishaps caused by you or, let's face it, those clumsy family members we all love.
So if my kid accidentally throws a baseball through the living room window, HOB has my back.
You got it. And now, for those who want the whole shebang, the ultimate protection plan, there's HOC. Think of it as the Cadillac of homeowners insurance, offering the most comprehensive coverage you can get. It covers your home and belongings on an open perils basis, which means if it's not specifically excluded in the policy, you're likely covered.
So HOC is for those who want to sleep soundly at night, knowing they're covered for pretty much anything.
Exactly. Now, regardless of which policy you choose, make sure you understand those essential coverage provisions, like replacement cost coverage, which ensures that if your home is destroyed, you can actually afford to rebuild it.
Because nobody wants to be left holding a hefty bill because they underestimated the cost of rebuilding in today's crazy market. But what about these co-insurance clauses the book mentions? They sound a little scary.
They're not scary, more like a friendly reminder to make sure you're adequately insured. It's like when your mama used to tell you to wear a jacket so you don't get sick.
Always got to listen to mom.
Right. These coinsurance clauses basically say you need to insure your property for at least a certain percentage, usually around 80% of its replacement cost. If you don't and something happens, you might not get full coverage for your losses.
So it's like playing insurance roulette. You might get lucky, or you might end up with a mountain of debt. I'll pass on that gamble.
That's the right attitude.
Yep.
Now, aside from protecting your property from those unexpected events, homeowners insurance also includes liability coverage, which is like having a financial shield to protect you if someone gets hurt on your property.
So if my neighbor decides to sue because they tripped over my kid's skateboard on my driveway, liability coverage has got me covered.
You got it. It protects you from those everyday accidents that can sometimes turn into legal nightmares. Now, speaking of finances, let's circle back to that topic for a moment and talk about a way to tap into the equity you've built up in your home equity loans.
Ah, yes. Home equity, that magical pool of money that seems both tempting and terrifying at the same time. Like, I know it's there, but should I really tack into it?
It's like having a secret stash of cash hidden in your basement. It's good to know it's there, but you've got to be smart about using it.
Modern real estate practice talks about these traditional home equity loans and then these other things called HELOCs, which sound a bit more intense. Can you break it down for us? What are the main differences between these two equity tapping options?
Sure. Think of a traditional home equity loan like a second mortgage. You borrow a specific amount of money, usually at a fixed interest rate, and then you make those lovely monthly payments until it's paid off, just like your first mortgage.
So it's like taking out another loan against your house, but hopefully for a good reason, right?
Exactly. Now, ALOCs, or home equity lines of credit, are a bit different. They work more like a credit card. You're approved for a certain credit limit, and then you can borrow against it as needed whenever you need it.
So it's like having a secret stash of cash, but with slightly higher interest rates than my first mortgage.
Precisely. And you only pay interest on the amount you actually borrow, making them flexible for ongoing expenses like home renovations or even consolidating high-interest debt.
It's like having a financial safety net that you can use when life throws you those unexpected curveballs.
Exactly. But as with all things financial, it's crucial to borrow responsibly. Make sure you understand the terms, those interest rates, and whether you can actually afford those monthly payments, because you don't want to risk losing your home.
Right, it's all fun and games until the bank comes knocking. Now let's zoom out for a moment and revisit those ever-important appraisals because they play a significant role not just in determining a property's value, but also in securing financing. Right.
Absolutely. Appraisals are like those reality checks we all need from time to time, especially in the emotionally charged world of real estate.
Modern real estate practice really emphasizes how crucial it is to understand the appraisal process because it can make or break a deal.
It's true. An appraisal can make or break your dreams of buying that dream home or selling your property for top dollar.
So what goes into an appraisal? Is it just some random person walking around the house saying, I'll give you this much for it?
Definitely not. It's a very systematic process that involves research, analysis, and a whole lot of number crunching. Appraisers are trained professionals who use established methods and market data to arrive at an objective assessment of a property's value.
The book mentions something about 4 characteristics of value demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Now, those sound a bit like fancy economic terms. Can you break it down for us?
Sure, think of it this way. Imagine a beautiful historic home in a coveted neighborhood with limited inventory, tons of potential buyers, and all the necessary permits in place for a smooth sale. That property is checking all the boxes. There's high demand from buyers. It's got that desirable utility because people actually want to live there. It's relatively scarce because not many homes like it are on the market, and it can be easily transferred from seller to buyer. That's what we call a valuable property.
So it's like a perfect storm of factors that drives up that price tag.
You got it. Now imagine the opposite, a property in a declining neighborhood, maybe with some outdated features. Functional obsolescence, that's a fancy way of saying it's no longer desirable, and maybe even some title issues that could scare away potential buyers. That property is going to have a much harder time fetching top dollar.
It's all about understanding what makes a property desirable, what makes it stand out from the crowd. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. How do appraisers actually put a dollar amount on a property?
They use those 3 main approaches we talked about earlier, the sales comparison, the cost, and the income approach. Each one serves a purpose depending on the type of property and the available data.
Right. So remind us again how those approaches work.
You bet. The sales comparison approach is like playing real estate matchmaker. Appraisers find those properties, we call them comps in the industry, that are similar to yours and have recently sold in the area. They compare things like square footage, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, lot size, location, condition, you name it. And then they make adjustments for any differences to arrive at a fair market value for your property.
So it's all about finding your property's twin and seeing how much they sold for. What about the cost approach? When do appraisers use that one?
The cost approach is often used when there aren't enough comparable sales to rely on, maybe for a unique property or new construction. In those cases, the appraiser figures out how much it would cost to build an exact replica of that property from scratch today.
It's like asking, how much would it cost to rebuild this masterpiece?
Exactly. And then they factor in depreciation because even brand new things lose some value over time. Now, the last approach, the income approach, is all about, well, income. Is typically used for those properties that generate rental income, like apartment buildings or commercial spaces.
So if you're looking to buy a rental property and be the next big-time landlord, the income approach would help you figure out if you're getting a good deal based on how much rent you could potentially charge.
Precisely. It takes into account things like average rental rates in the area, vacancy rates, because, let's face it, you don't always have a tenant, operating expenses, and those unpredictable market trends.
Sounds complicated. It's like valuing a business based on its potential earning power. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the legal aspects of contracts and agency to the financial intricacies of mortgages and appraisals. But we can't wrap things up without talking about those dreaded taxes because, let's be honest, they're an inevitable part of life, especially when it comes to owning real estate.
You're telling me. And the source material does not shy away from those tax implications.
So give it to us straight. What are the main taxes that Texas homeowners need to be aware of?
Well, first and foremost, there's the big one, property taxes. Those recurring taxes are based on your property's assessed value, which, as we learned, is determined by those lovely folks at the appraisal district.
So the more valuable your property, the bigger the tax bill. Makes sense. But how are property taxes actually determined? Is there a secret formula?
It's not exactly a secret, but it can seem a bit mysterious. Essentially, each county in Texas sets its own tax rate, which is then multiplied by your property's assessed value to calculate your annual tax bill.
So my property tax bill could vary significantly depending on which county my dream home happens to be located in.
You got it. And those tax rates can be influenced by all sorts of factors, like the county's budget, the demand for local services, even how efficiently they collect those taxes.
So location, location, location applies to property taxes as well.
Absolutely. Now, another tax implication to keep in mind, especially if you're thinking about selling your property down the line, is capital gains tax.
Capital gains. That sounds like something only Wall Street tycoons need to worry about.
Not necessarily. It might sound complicated, but it's simpler than you think. Capital gains tax is essentially the tax you pay on the profit you make when you sell an asset, like real estate, for more than you originally paid for it.
Okay, so let's say I buy a fixer-upper for a steal, put in some sweat equity, give it a fresh coat of paint, and then sell it for a tidy profit. Am I telling you Uncle Sam is going to want a cut of my hard-earned cash?
Well, in most cases, yes. But the good news is there are some exceptions and strategies to minimize that capital gains tax liability. For example, if you've lived in the property as your primary residence for at least 2 of the past 5 years, you might be eligible to exclude a portion of those capital gains from taxation up to $250,000 for single filers and a whopping $500,000 for married couples filing jointly.
Whoa! So it pays to stay put for a while. Now what about those regular income taxes we all know and love? Does owning a home in Texas come with any tax perks when it's time to file those dreaded tax returns?
You bet it does. If you itemize your deductions on your federal income tax return, you can typically deduct the mortgage interest you paid on your primary residence, as well as any property taxes you shelled out.
It's like the government's giving you a little financial pat on the back for being a homeowner.
Exactly. It can add up to some significant savings, especially in those early years of a mortgage when those interest payments tend to be higher. But let's be real, not all tax news is good news, right? So we need to talk about those less than pleasant tax leads.
Tax leases. Okay, those don't sound fun. What are they all about?
Well, imagine this. You forget to pay your property taxes. Maybe life got a little crazy. Or you accidentally tossed that tax bill in the recycling bin. Whatever the reason, those unpaid taxes can come back to haunt you in the form of a tax lien.
So it's like the government saying, hey, you owe us money and we're going to put a hold on your property until you pay up.
You got it.
Yeah.
And those tax liens take priority over other liens, meaning they need to be paid first if you decide to sell your property, or worst case scenario, if it goes into foreclosure.
Yikes. It's a good thing I'm always on top of my bills. Okay, so we've covered taxes, the good, the bad, and the potentially ugly. But there are other legal landmines lurking in the world of Texas real estate. Modern real estate practice mentions something called easements, which sound a bit like legal headaches.
Well, easements can be a bit tricky, but they're not always a bad thing. Essentially, an easement is a legal right that allows someone else to use a portion of your property for a specific purpose, even though you still technically own it.
So it's like giving your neighbor permission to cut through your backyard to get to the park, but on a more official legal level.
Exactly. That would be an access easement, one of the most common types. You'll also see utility easements, which give those utility companies the right to access your property to install and maintain power lines, those essential water pipes, or even those gas lines. And then there are those drainage easements that dictate how water flows across properties, which is especially important here in Texas, where we can get those torrential downpours.
So those power lines running through my backyard aren't just there because the electric company thought it would be a scenic route.
Probably not. They likely have an easement that gives them the legal right to do so. And these easements can be granted in a few different ways. Sometimes they're granted voluntarily, meaning you agree to let someone use your property in a specific way. Other times they're created out of necessity, like when a property owner is landlocked and needs a way to access their property.
So even if you don't want someone driving across your property, they might have a legal right to do so if it's the only way to get to their own land. Talk about awkward neighbor situations.
It can happen, and it highlights the importance of being aware of any easements that might affect a property before you buy it.
Right, because no one wants to be surprised by a long-lost relative claiming they have the right to graze their sheep on your newly landscaped lawn. But easements aren't the only potential property line disputes that can arise. The book also mentions encroachments, which sound even more intrusive.
They can be. Think of an encroachment as an unwelcome visitor on your property. It's when something from a neighboring property illegally extends onto your land.
So if my neighbor's prize-winning rose bushes are actually a foot over the property line, that's an encroachment.
You got it. Or if their fancy new shed is partially built on your land, or if their driveway extends onto your property, creating a parking nightmare, all those situations are considered encroachments. And they can lead to some heated neighborly disputes if not addressed properly.
It's like finding out that your neighbor's car is permanently parked in your garage without your permission. Not cool.
Not cool at all. Now, resolving these encroachments can involve things like having a friendly chat with your neighbor. Maybe they just need to trim those rose bushes, or it might require a more formal agreement like an easement, or even in some cases legal action if things get really messy.
It's like they always say, good fences make good neighbors, especially in Texas. But enough about those pesky property lines. Let's talk about the light at the end of the real estate tunnel, the moment we've all been waiting for closing day.
Ah, yes. Closing day. The culmination of all your hard work, negotiations, and maybe even a few sleepless nights. It's where those dreams of homeownership, or maybe those dreams of cashing in on a sale, finally become a reality.
The Modern Real Estate Practice book does a deep dive into the closing process. And it's more than just signing on the dotted line, right?
Oh, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. It's like a carefully choreographed dance with a whole cast of characters involved, each playing a vital role.
Okay, so walk us through this closing day choreography. Who are the key players we need to know about?
Well, you've got the buyer and the seller, of course, the stars of the show. Then there's the lender, if the buyer is using a mortgage to finance the purchase. And let's not forget the title company, those guardians of clear titles, making sure there are no hidden surprises lurking in the property's history. And last but not least, the closing agent, who's like the conductor of this real estate orchestra, making sure everything runs smoothly and according to plan.
It's starting to sound like my wedding day. A whole lot of important people gathered in a room, hoping everything goes off without a hitch. But instead of wedding cake, we've got stacks of paperwork, right?
You got it. And one of the most important documents in that stack is the closing statement. Think of it as the financial playbook for the entire transaction.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's so special about this closing statement?
It's basically a detailed account of every single penny involved in the deal. It lists the purchase price, of course, but also all those closing costs, those pesky loan fees, any prorated property taxes, prepaid insurance premiums, everything but the kitchen sink.
So it's basically a financial truth teller, making sure everyone's paying and receiving the correct amounts.
Precisely. Both the buyer and the seller get a copy of this closing statement before the big day, usually a few days beforehand, so they can review it carefully, ask any questions, and make sure everything aligns with the contract and their expectations.
Because no one wants to be surprised by hidden fees or last-minute changes on closing day. It's like checking your restaurant bill before you pay. Always make sure those numbers add up.
Exactly. It's all about transparency and ensuring everyone walks away from the closing table feeling good about the deal. Now, speaking of feeling good, let's circle back to the entity that works tirelessly behind the scenes to protect consumers and maintain those high standards in the Texas real estate market, the Texas Real Estate Commission, or T for short.
Ah, yes. TIER's our trusty guide throughout this real estate adventure. They've come up quite a bit in both the Key Point Review and Modern Real Estate Practice in Texas. It's clear they've got a lot on their plate.
They do. TRC is like the watchful guardian of Texas real estate, ensuring fairness, transparency, and ethical conduct throughout the industry.
So what exactly are their superpowers?
Well, they wear many hats. They're the ones who decide who gets to be a real estate agent or broker in Texas. They set those education requirements and make sure everyone's following the rules. They enforce those real estate laws and regulations we've been talking about, investigate any complaints against licensees, and champion consumer protection.
Wow, they're like the real estate superheroes, swooping in to save the day.
That's a great way to put it. They have the power to issue and revoke licenses, mediate disputes, and even discipline those who break the rules. Their presence helps maintain the integrity of the Texas real estate market, giving buyers and sellers peace of mind.
It's good to know someone's got our backs in this wild world of real estate. Well, folks, there you have it. We've explored the ins and outs of Texas real estate, from those unique property ownership laws and those sometimes confusing contracts, to those crucial appraisals and inspections. the ever-important financing options, and even those little details that can make a big difference, like easements and property disclosures.
We've covered a lot of ground, but the key takeaway here is that knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the Texas real estate market. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a first-time home buyer, or just curious about what makes this market tick, I hope this deep dive has given you valuable insights and the confidence to tackle your next real estate adventure head-on.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to go it alone. Don't be afraid to lean on those experienced professionals, those real estate agents, lenders, inspectors, and title companies who can guide you through the process and help you achieve your real estate goals. Because at the end of the day, buying or selling a property in Texas should be an exciting and rewarding experience, not a stressful and confusing one. So from all of us here at The Deep Dive, happy house hunting, happy selling, and until next time, may your real estate dreams become a Texas-sized reality.